Okay, hello, great souls. So good to be with you today in a slightly different location. This is outside Shela Bhavan in the beautiful garden here in the Ananda community. So let's begin together with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramahansa Yoganandaji, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow to you all. Bless our time together. Help us as we study these deep teachings of yoga, the blessings that Yogananda brought to us of bringing East and West together. May we find the truth that is here for us and be able to apply it to our journey of awakening. Om, peace. Amen. Okay, so today we're looking at chapter 7, and chapter 8. 7 was last week. And as with every chapter, it's so rich and meaningful. So the highlight of chapter 8 is Yogananda's meeting with the great scientist Jagadas Chandra Bose. And he was a pioneer in understanding the sensitivity and the consciousness of plants. He was a great inventor, a physicist, and he developed instruments that were able to reveal the life force within plant life, as well as the metals. So in his instruments, and it was verifiable scientifically, he was able to demonstrate that plant life is impacted, that it has an emotional life, that it has qualities similar to what had been. And I would say even today, it stands. Right, so my idea, how many consider, but that's really what mostly plants, so the life force with sensitive to its environment, experience depression in terms of its, as well as being revived. He demonstrated administer chloroform is an anesthetist. Can't think of what you understand, and if you don't, does sleep, what chloroform will do is it. There's probably, I have no idea how many people would consider plant life to be intelligent, but that's really what Dr. Bose was talking about. Is mostly what he was talking about is the sensitivity of plants, so the life force within a plant that is sensitive to its environment, and that it can experience things as human beings do. So fatigue and depression in terms of its growth, right, and death, as well as being revived. So one of the things that he talked about is, and he demonstrated with his instruments, is the plant he would administer chloroform, which is an anesthetizer. So chloroform can, and I can't think of what the wording is, but I'm going to assume in this moment that you understand, and if you don't, look that up. But what it does is it puts you to sleep. What chloroform will do is it'll put you to sleep. So he demonstrated that plants could be put to sleep, and then he had an anecdote to bring the plant back to life. What he also showed is that when this was administered to large trees which normally would be traumatized in a move, in replanting, could be moved without trauma. and they would survive the move. I remember when James, my husband, and I lived in New Jersey, our neighbor was, she wasn't an official botanist, but she loved plants and flowers. And they had a very small house and a small plot of land right next to us. And she did so much with that small space. It was always inspiring to me. And we would visit as neighbors and chat about life, how are things going. And I remember her telling me every year, so on the East Coast especially, the winter, although in New Jersey, is milder than the Midwest, where James and I lived for a while, which is much more intense. We lived in Chicago and outside Chicago. So winter there is longer and deeper. And plant life and gardening, you feel it. There is such a joy that comes into the air when springtime comes. People just go outside. It was extraordinary for me because I grew up in the Bay Area of San Francisco Bay Area, Northern California. Our seasons are very mild here, and we do laugh at ourselves about feeling cold at times because it gets to freezing overnight, or it might have frost in the morning. We understand that's pretty mild climate. And I really came to understand that when I lived in the Midwest. I also lived in my 20s for a time in New York, which is also, it's interesting, New York and New Jersey are so close to each other. But of course, and it also depends where you are in those regions. But in New Jersey, you definitely have winter time and planting. There is also a joy in being able to plant and garden. Because we're in the fall season right now, I have to say the most spectacular falls I've ever seen were in New Jersey. Picture postcard beauty. And all of this is really talking about plant life, right? The beauty of nature, the power of nature. And so my neighbor, she created very elaborate planting designs and plans in the wintertime, looking forward to spring. And there was also planting she did in the fall. But I'm thinking of her, when I was reading this, I thought of her because she told me about this weeping cherry tree she had. And when they had moved it, it was, and in fact, now that I think about it, I think they were going to plant it. And she was talking to me about a special company that knew how to move trees. Because if you don't do it correctly, it traumatizes the tree and it won't survive. So when I was reading this, it was very interesting to me that the scientist, Dr. Bose, had figured out how to transplant trees with chloroform. Now, I have no idea in this particular company, and I didn't know, I don't even know if I'd finished reading the autobiography by then. I think I had, but I didn't remember that particular thing. So it's fascinating to me when I looked at this chapter, and then again, all the gems and treasures of yogic teaching within the chapter. So as I go through it, because I know that I'll be having this satsang each week with you, I take notes for myself of what's standing out to me this time as I read the chapter. And one of the first things that stood out to me is this idea that the scientist was talking about, and that Yogananda's whole mission was focused on, which was bringing East and West together. That was the mission that he was given when he came to the United States, is to bring the best of the East of India and to embrace the best of Western culture, and to talk about the power of the harmony between these two. So Dr. Bose talks about this. And one of the things that he identifies as Western and Eastern is he says that the Western, and he went to Cambridge, he was schooled at Cambridge University in England, and he learned there and came to appreciate there the scientific method of exploring and testing and verifying truth. Right? And that's the practice of science. And bringing that together with introspection from the East, which is this deep intuitive listening for insights. One of the things that yoga talks about, and introspection, also known as self-study, in the yamas and niyamas is a practice that is deeper than analysis. So analyzing information would be much more the conscious mind, where we take facts and we understand them mentally, right? We gather factual information it's a practice, and analyzing is a conscious mind practice, where intuition or introspection and self-study, being swadhyaya, it's referred to in yoga, is a practice where we take information and we listen very deeply for the truth within that. And that's a perception of truth, which is deeper than factual knowledge. So it often begins with something that's observable outwardly, and then listening intuitively, deeply, for the truth to be revealed. Yogananda called intuition the voice of God within, and that's the voice of God within our heart, that we hear God's voice within us in the heart center as intuition. There were two prominent Americans who employed this practice with plants. And the first, Yogananda dedicated the Autobiography to, and that's Luther Burbank. Luther Burbank lived in Northern California in the Sonoma County. James and I lived there for a while, and it was quite wonderful that all the different places that are the banks that are called Luther Burbank Bank, and parks that are dedicated to Luther Burbank. And he has his home is a historical site with a beautiful garden that Yogananda visited. When James and I we lived in Sebastopol for a while, for a number of years actually, which is a beautiful area in Northern California in the wine country. And we were part of the Santa Rosa Ananda community, very small but vibrant community. And it was not a community like we have in Palo Alto where we live together, but it was a meditation center, and they had a beautiful temple there, very small, again, humble. And but the power of a small group of dedicated souls is notable. It was a great blessing in our life to be connected to that community. And so that was in Santa Rosa, and Yogananda visited Santa Rosa, and there was always a special feeling about that he had been here. In fact, I haven't seen it myself, but I'm told that in Luther Burbank's house that you can visit, the book is open to a page where Yogananda signed it when he came to visit Luther Burbank. And so you'll see a picture of Luther Burbank in the book, and he had this extraordinary, so he was, a scientist with plants, and he did many amazing hybrids with plants, and he had a love for the plant world, an appreciation of it, a reverence. He saw the sacredness of life, and he had a sensitivity to work with plants in an extraordinary way. The other well-known or famous individual with plants is George Washington Carver, an African American. I think it was the 1800s that he lived. I don't remember the time frame of his life. He was a slave. He was born into slavery, and I don't remember now the details of him being free. So I think that in his lifetime he was born a slave and became free, or was, it was very close in there. So I don't remember, because I can't remember his lifespan. You can look that up. But he did so much for the development of soy and peanuts. So and one of the famous things that he has said is that if you love anything enough, it will talk to you. So he could hear from the plants. He was guided by the plants of how to draw from them their properties to make things, to utilize, right? So the movement away from cotton to soy and peanuts, really a beautiful, extraordinary life. So Yogananda, I don't have my normal clock in front of me. We're doing fine on time. Okay. So let's see. Let me pause for a moment. In our community, we live near the train tracks. And so periodically we need to pause when we're outside to let the trains go by. So Yogananda, through talking about this incredible scientist, Dr. Bose, and who had this great reverence and respect for bringing the East and West together. The other thing, so these are the treasures in the chapter. One of the things that's mentioned, there was an opening day for the laboratory, and there was a symbol of a lotus flower, and then also a symbol of a feminine figure. And Yogananda said that he talks in the footnotes about the lotus. In yoga, you'll see lotus flower a lot. And one of the things that the lotus flower represents is that it comes from mud. So its roots are in the mud, but the flower itself emanates a purity and a beauty. And so it's seen as a metaphor for the soul, that we, in our human journey, our human incarnation, that essence of divinity that is pure light and divine beauty is often obscured. And so the flower comes from a dark origin, and it reveals its true, the soul's true beauty. So it's often shown in yoga as a representation that as we shed this seeming darkness, is what I would say, for our own inner radiance to shine. So he talks in the book, Yogananda, there's about the lotus flower. The other thing that he says about the image of the feminine figure, let's see, so this is page 66. Behind the lotus fountain, a sculptured female figure with a torch conveyed Indian respect for women as the immortal light bearer. So one of the things that Yogananda taught and emphasized in terms of the nature of God, which is, there are many aspects in which the nature of God, it's hard when you say the nature of God, which is infinity, so it's difficult to give language to. But Yogananda talked about the divine feminine and divine mother. So you'll hear in our prayers, in fact, the prayer I say every week, Yogananda said, which is Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God. Each of these are aspects of the divine. None of them are the full expression of the divine, but they do speak to a way in which God is manifested and a way in which we can relate. And it carries these aspects of the divine, carry qualities for us to expand within ourselves and to expand in our relationship with God. So the Divine Mother, Yogananda mostly referred to God as Divine Mother. And that comes from, and he's saying here in the book, from the Indian tradition, that the feminine is seen as a divine representation of God. And so I just wanted to mention that. That's in the book. So let's see. Some other things he talks about, and this is quoted from the scientist, is this was in, he had some conversations. He invited Yogananda to come to his laboratory and so part of what's in the chapter are their conversation, their dialogue, and then also there's an aspect of the opening day speech that the scientist gave. And he talks about a time will come when the West is able to appreciate the contributions of the East. In fact, early on, one of the things that Yogananda said, he overhears what leads him to learn about the scientist and the work he's doing, is he overhears a conversation. So that's how the chapter begins. Let me go back to that. He said, overhearing the conversation, I walked closer to a group of professors engaged in scientific discussion. If my motive in joining them was racial pride, I regret it. And so that right there is something that Yogananda talked about, that in the teaching of yoga, we have had many bodies, we've lived as many different races, we've lived as many different genders, we've had all kinds, in fact, he said every experience we've had. And with that, ultimately in our journey of awakening, we grow in our consciousness beyond the identification with any particular race, with any particular gender. We learn to appreciate what each has to offer. Again, as a reflection of the divine. Oh, this is another way in which God is present. So it was touching to me that he mentioned that. And being in California in the United States in 2020, in the fall of 2020, there's a lot our country has been going through in terms of a sense of division around politics, mainly, that's been kind of heightened. And so, simultaneous to that is a consciousness of unity, which I hear a lot of as well. And it's beautiful and touching to me because many people, in response to that divisive energy and this idea of really what I would say, from my perspective in yogic teachings, an over-identification with a particular, in this case, political party, where you become so identified that you relate to that which is different. I would say in a devastating. It's just I heard one person say, and it was beautiful to me because it reflected to me the deeper teachings of yoga, which is that, there's a difference between an opponent and an enemy. So we can be different, there can be competition, there can be a way in which we challenge one another and come out of it better because of that. And that would be a healthy way of having different ideas and challenging one another. So versus we're different and I have to annihilate that which is different. So to me, Yogananda was touching upon that in that one sentence, that if there was a pride that motivated him, he regrets it because it's not the right way. It's not, we are one world. We are a global community. And that is the teaching of yoga. Yoga is union. Yoga means union. That's what yoga means. So just a small but important thing that's highlighted that's mentioned in the chapter that I wanted to highlight. So let's see. He talks about, this is what I started to say, is that the scientist was saying the day will come when the Western world will appreciate the contributions of India. And I was reminded of a beautiful talk that Sai Ganesh gave. So Sai Ganesh is one of our light bearers and ministers here in Ananda, Palo Alto, and I think it was for Yogananda's 100th anniversary, so you may be able to find this online. He talked about the East and West, right? Sai Ganesh was born in India and came to the United States for work, definitely. I think he'd already completed his schooling, so he came here for work in Silicon Valley. So we have a very large Indian community, which is beautiful here in Silicon Valley. But there's a lot of diversity. I really appreciate it as a Caucasian. I appreciate the exposure to different cultures. And especially, probably not surprisingly, the Indian culture, I am blessed to experience. With yoga, it comes into my world even more. But Sai Ganesh was talking about this coming together, like how much has happened in these 100 years of the East and West coming together, not just here in the United States, but also in India. And I think it was last summer that I was on a extended spiritual training, really. It's called Living Discipleship Program, and many of the Indian monks came. It was so fantastic. It was so wonderful to be together. So the things that Sai Ganesh was talking about, I could really see in them. And again, this prediction, the day will come when really East and West comes together, and there's a greater appreciation on both sides of the world for what the other has to offer. Sorry, I have to keep looking at my watch just to stay on track with time. So we have a few more minutes. So that was something I was aware of as I was reading the chapter, is this movement of East and West. And again, that was Yogananda's mission to teach it. He taught the Church of all religions, is what he called the church in Southern California, in self-realization. So he had a church of all religions. And that was the heart of his teaching, that truth is universal. When you touch truth, it will be present. It may be spoken in a different language. It may be spoken from a different spiritual tradition, but there will be a universal reality that you find. And right now, Ananda, Palo Alto has a beautiful program going on that is a weekly program where spiritual teachers from around the world are giving talks on different spiritual traditions, illuminating this universal truth. Every class, I just watch, for James and I watch the faces of others who are in the class. It's all on Zoom. I believe you can still join it. So it's definitely worth checking out. But here we have these teachers from all these different spiritual traditions, and as they talk about their tradition, you see the universal quality of truth within it. This is a beautiful time to be emphasizing that, the unity in life. And that's what the scientist Dr. Bose was showing. One of Yogananda's beautiful quotes about the life force that is present in minerals and plants and animals and human beings. Yogananda said that God sleeps in the minerals, dreams in the flowers, awakens in the animals. In man, in human beings, he is awake. And this is part of what he said about our nervous system. And the way that we are built as human beings is that we can, when we get to this point of evolution, we're able to realize God within us. We have a consciousness and a capacity to awaken fully. So seeing the beauty, the unity of all life force in everything, each phase has an importance and a value. And so the practice is to be respectful of all of that, and then to recognize the blessing of a human form, to realize fully our own God nature. So that's what I got out of our reading this week, Chapter 8, An Autobiography of a Yogi. Thanks for joining me today. It's great to be with you. Wishing you many blessings today and this week. Thank you. Was that on time? It might have gone. Was it?
I couldn't sit here, so